All right, so now as to the simile of the cave, what is it supposed to teach us? What is it about? And Socrates, or well, Plato, is pretty clear about this right in the beginning. He says, uh, starts this section by saying, I want you to go on to picture the enlightenment or ignorance of our human conditions somewhat as follows. Okay, so the thing we're trying to learn something about, the thing we're trying to understand and to stick with our earlier classification, let's just call that B, the thing we don't understand so well, is enlightenment. On the one side and ignorance on the other. And as you know, Plato is really concerned from the days of the Apology with this question of wisdom. And so here we're going to find out in the simile of the cave what enlightenment or knowledge or wisdom really looks like. And of course, the philosopher rulers that are supposed to run our ideal model city or model state, they're supposed to have enlightenment. They're supposed to have that special kind of wisdom. And the reason we ordinary folk agree for them to rule us is because they have something, they have enlightenment, and it's presumably something that we others don't have or don't have in that degree. And so now he says, let me illustrate what I mean by an analogy. So by something that we do understand. And right here, you're going to see that the way illustrations work is they're images, they're pictures. So the thing we do understand, or at least perhaps we should say the thing that's easier for us to understand, is the picture that he's painting. And what's the picture that he's painting? So it's the thing we do understand. A, in our earlier classification, the picture that he's painting is the painting of a cave scenario. So he's telling us a story, right? It's storytelling, story time. And story time tells us a story about prisoners in a cave. That's the part of the analogy that we understand. Once he's laid it all out. That picture is easy to grasp once it's all laid out. So let's call that cave world. And if you want, we can kind of contrast that with the enlightenment and ignorance that he's trying to help us get to see by talking about cave world. That would be what perhaps we might call the real world, our actual world. He wants to tell us something about enlightenment and ignorance in the real world by telling us about something that's going on in cave world. And right there, you see, you might say, well, wouldn't it be easier to go the other way around, right? I mean, don't we understand what it means to be smart and what it means to be dumb in the real world? And the answer, of course, is no. That's the whole point. We're trying to understand what wisdom truly is in our world. And to get there, we'll have to go through this illustration. Okay, so so the way we're going to have to proceed then is we're going to have to first look at what that cave scenario is, and then draw conclusions for the real world. stick with the classification. The thing that we do understand, cave world, should be on the bottom, sorry, would go down here, the thing we understand. The thing we don't understand, we'll put on the top, B, and we're going to paint the scenario here, and then we're going to draw arrows to connect the two. So once again, let's call this cave world, and let's call this the real world. So what is cave world? Well, you just read on. It says, imagine an underground chamber, like a cave with an entrance open to the daylight and running a long way underground. So something like this. We have up here a thing, let's call that the entrance. It's also the exit from the other side. And it's a long way going underground. Outside, let me perhaps do this other way around. If this is the entrance, there's a road going in down here. So roughly speaking, let me put it differently. This is the outside in cave world, and this is the inside the cave. All right, so what do we find inside the cave? In this chamber are men who have been prisoners there since they were children. Their legs and necks being so fastened that they can only look straight ahead of them and cannot turn their heads. All right, so a version of this we had on the board last time already. So let's put them here. So there's these guys, prisoners, been there since they were kids, so they presumably grew all long beards. They're bald by now. And they're shackled to the cave wall, and they can't move at all except look straight ahead. And there's a bunch of them. And here's the wall. All right. Now, what they see is the following. Behind them and above them, a fire is burning. All right, so let's put the fire over here. Actually, let's do it like this. Lower that a little bit, because we're going to soon see there's a need for this. Up here, there's a fire. And it's burning brightly. Smoky, smoke, smoke. All right, up there, fire is burning. And between the fire and the prisoners runs a road, in front of which a curtain wall has been built. So there's the curtain wall. There's a road here, which presumably connects to this guy here. Okay, so, and that curtain wall is like the screen at puppet shows between the operators and their audience. All right, so let's see what happens here. So basically, what we have is we have these puppeteers that are carrying above their heads these models or cutouts of things. So let's say, what is he carrying? He's carrying a cow cutout. All right. And as it turns out, this kind of model cow, because it's illuminated by the fire behind it, throws a shadow on the wall. And that shadow is a shadow of a cow. Now, mind you, Plato doesn't speak of cows. I'm just using that as an example. So, all right, so there's a shadow on the wall. And what those prisoners see all their life is nothing but shadows. And imagine further that there are men carrying all sorts of gear along them, blah, blah. So we already covered that. Now he says, then if they were able to talk to each other, would they not assume that the shadows they saw were the real things? So let's say they talk to each other. And he says, holy cow. And the other guy says, yep. That's their world. They don't know of each other. They hear each other, perhaps. They talk to each other, but they haven't seen each other. The only thing they've ever seen is these images on the wall. But the reality is they're just shadows. They're not what's real. What's in fact real is that there's a fire illuminating a cutout, illuminating, throwing a shadow. Okay, so about all of this stuff, they know nothing. And they also know nothing about the fact that there's a path outside, that there's a cave, and that they're actually on the inside, that there's an outside over here. None of that they know. And so they would believe that the shadows of the objects we mentioned were in all respects real. Yes, inevitably. Then think what would naturally happen to them if they were released from their bonds and cured of their delusions. Suppose one of them were to let loose and suddenly compelled to stand up and turn his head and look and walk towards the fire. All these actions would be painful, and he would be too dazzled to see properly the objects of which he used to see the shadows. So the first thing that we see is, like, even if we release them, let's cut that guy loose, turn him around and tell him, here, this is what's actually going on, dude. And then he's going to say, this is just going to be painful for him. The truth of the matter is going to be very hard to see. He's going to find a lot more comfort looking back at the shadows. This is going to be almost unbearable. Not let alone, so looking at the model cow is unbearable. Looking at the puppeteer would be unbearable. Looking into the fire, way unbearable, because all he's ever seen was shadows. So if he was told that what he used to see was mere illusion, and that he was now nearer reality and seeing more correctly, because it was turned towards objects that were more real. And if on top of that, he were compelled to say what each of these passing objects was when it was pointed out to him, don't you think he would be at a loss and think that what he used to see was more real than the objects now being pointed out to him? Yes. So what we see here is that there's a bit of a progression here. in terms of, so there's a sliding scale, if you will, of reality. These shadows aren't very real. They're not very substantial. What's real is this cutout. That's the reality of the thing. But then to kind of cut to the chase here, of course, the cow is just a model. The fire is just kind of, it's a source of light, but it's not the same as the sunlight out here. So now Plato imagines what would happen if we took that prisoner not just to see the model cow and the puppeteers and the fire inside the cave. What if we took that released prisoner up the slope to the entrance of the cave and into the outside, where, God forbid, there may be real cows? Grazing on real grass and real flowers. All things this guy has never seen. This stuff, which is actually much more real than the mere copies or models of real things, would be even harder for him to see, let alone looking into the source of light that illuminates everything. So that's the basic scenario. Now, what's real interesting is that, so let me read this for you for a second. And if, I went on, he were forcibly dragged up the steep and rocky ascent and not let go till he had been dragged out into the sunlight, the process would be a painful one, to which he would much object. And when he emerged into the light, his eyes would be so overwhelmed by the brightness of it that he wouldn't be able to see a single one of the things he was now told were real. Certainly not at first, because he would need to grow accustomed to the light before he could see things in the world outside the cave. First, he would find it the easiest to look at the shadows. So let's see, cow casts a shadow. Guess what? That's familiar. Seen a shadow. That's going to be easier for him to look at. And maybe if there's like a little pond here, a reflection of the cow, maybe that would be easier for him to see. Turn this thing around. All those things would be easy to see for him at first. The reflections, the shadows, but the real things, hard to come to grips with. All right. Next, so he would find it easiest to look at the shadows, next at the reflections of men and other objects in the water, and later on at the objects themselves. After that, he would find it easier to observe the heavenly bodies in the sky at night than by day, and to look at the light of the moon and stars rather than at the sun and its light. The thing he would be able to do last would be to look directly at the sun. Later on, though, he would come to the conclusion that it is the sun that produces the changing seasons and years and controls everything in the visible world, and is, in a sense, responsible for everything that he and his fellow prisoners used to see, right? So because, after all, the fire is ultimately made from either directly by channeling sunlight through some kind of a glass or something, or maybe it's cast from objects or fueled by things that can only grow because sunlight is out there. So ultimately, if you really understand the situation here, everything that they thought was most real turns out to be possible only because of the sun out there. made real only because it's a copy or some faint version, an image of the things out here. And so he will finally come to understand that what used to be the most real turns out to be the least real. And what he at first can't even see because it's so overwhelming turns out to be the most real. And the most real of all is going to be the sun that gives life and meaning to all of it. So, and when he thought of his first home, so thinking back into the cave and what passed for wisdom there and of his fellow prisoners, don't you think he would congratulate himself on his good fortune and be sorry for them, right? So once you realize the truth, you cannot but feel sorry for the folks down there. And now the way the story continues is once he's out here, he's never going to want to go back, right? This is going to be enlightenment, and this is going to be ignorance. So we're down here, we have a sliding scale of reality. Up here, we have a sliding scale of ignorance. And now you can see we're moving up into the thing that we're trying to understand. This is what ignorance is. Watching shadows on the wall. This is what enlightenment is. Understanding the reality of a situation. Okay, I'll cut this video right here because now we're going to move up into the real world.